Good morning. Welcome to another edition of Elevenses. It's Sunday, 30th of August, last day of summer here in the UK. Autumn to look forward to. Is that a good thing? Not so sure. It's pretty chilly this morning out there. So settle back with a brew, grab yourself a biscuit, and listen to what I have to say on my Elevenses webcast this morning. We're going to be looking at a result for bikers up in the Lake District who want to ride off-road. We're going to have a look at 20 limits and accidents and what's going on there and some claims that are being made. I'll have a quick reminder about my on-road and off-road coaching, tell you the difference and what you can get out of them. BMW, have they created the maintenance-free bike chain yet? Somehow I doubt it. And then finally, I'm just going to talk very quickly about my Better Biking article about traction control and whether or not technological advances like this are actually quite what they're dressed up as. Anyway, start with some good news. A bid by a group of ramblers, mountain bikers and horse riders to ban trail bike riders and 4x4s from byways in the Lake District, the ones that they actually have legal access to, because not all byways are actually accessible to motor vehicles at the moment. That challenge has been thrown out to by a High Court judge. The National Park Authority itself had actually found in favour of allowing motor vehicles to continue to use these green lanes. They're in Langdale and Coniston valleys, claiming that they polluted and damaged the area and that the vehicles themselves are a safety risk. So the appeal came from the group. They're called the Green Lanes Environmental Action Movement, or GLEAM. And the legal action was crowdfunded, apparently, backed by a 374,000 signatory petition. And what they basically argued was that these motor vehicles are inappropriate for a national park. However, Mr. Justice Dove agreed that it was hard to prove that the limited, albeit increased, usage of motor vehicles was making the area less attractive to a degree where it reduced tourism or outdoor activities in the area, and it dismissed this group's case on all counts. He did agree that weather and mountain bike use eroded trails just as much as vehicle use. And he was also apprised of the fact that there are no less than 2,038 miles of byway, footpath, bridleways and minor roads in the Lake District National Park, and just 74 of those are legally accessible by motor vehicle. So a bit of a result if you like riding off-road, and if you do, I can thoroughly recommend the Trail Riders Federation as an organisation to get involved with. They do a lot to support off-road riding in the UK. They have become increasingly well organised over the last few years, and I would certainly give them a big thumbs up. At one point, I was thinking about getting an off-road bike for myself, but quite honestly, living in London as I do at the moment, not a lot of point in it. But yeah, give them a call. Go and look at their website, Trail Riders Federation, and find out what they have to offer you. Off-road riding is fun. I've done a little bit of it myself. It's a very different challenge to riding on road, and you can have a lot of fun at fairly low speed and remarkably low cost as well. Okay, somewhere else where we are seeing some risks as riders are 20 limits. The accident rate in these zones has allegedly increased by 148% in 3 years. And that's based on the latest DFT casualty report, which shows that there were no less than 10,661 accidents on 20 roads in the UK in 2018. That accounted for nearly 1 in 10 of all road accidents for the year. And naturally, it's drivers who are getting the blame and riders, of course, with claims that it's all down to the fact that drivers and riders are ignoring the speed limits in these roads. Just 13% of drivers apparently adhere to 20 limits. Now, that's all from an article written by a website called bookmygarage.com. But rather bizarrely, the head of marketing, Jessica Potts, claims that these 20 limits, she says, they help improve traffic flow and cut down on accidents. Well, clearly, if they've gone up by 148%, which is the headline of this article, they can't have it both ways. Either they are causing accidents or they're not causing accidents. It can't go both ways. In fact, the DFT's own research on 20 limits suggests that they work best when the average speed is below 24 miles per hour. But more than that, you need context to that 148% increase claim. It doesn't take a sort of a rocket scientist to work out that if there's 148% increase in vehicles using 20 mile per hour roads, and there's no overall change in the crash rate on these roads. Now, trying to find out how many extra miles of 20 limit there have been that have gone in place is very difficult. I did have a look, but I couldn't find any figures for that. But according to a report in the Times, increasingly local authorities are putting these slower zones in place, and they say that a third of the UK population will soon be living in areas that will have them. The pro 20 lobby is a pretty vocal one. It's one of these common sense arguments, isn't it, that if you reduce speed, you reduce the severity of a crash. And the Royal Society for the Prevention of Accidents actually says that the risk of a fatality in a 30 mile per hour crash is 5 times higher than a collision at 20 miles per hour. However, a report published by the Department for Transport themselves, which they put out at the end of 2018, what they actually found was that where 30 mile per hour limits were reduced to 20s, it had next to no impact on road safety. And the other two big claims for reducing speed limits, they didn't find it had any significant impact on air pollution, and nor did it promote the uptake of walking or cycling in areas where the speed limits were enforced. So, there are a whole bunch of different arguments going on here, and there are a lot of issues which are in conflict with each other. So to sort of make it sound like it's the driver's fault that accidents are going up is spurious, in my opinion. It's interesting to note that Scotland has recently rejected a one-size-fits-all 20 mile per hour speed limit plan, which would have seen these lower limits imposed in all residential areas, and it's been left to individual boroughs to decide whether or not they impose the limits. Of course, skeptics about the limits themselves would have a different argument altogether, and they suggest that these zones are cash cows. And they will point to figures like the fact that 77,000 motorists in London have been clocked speeding in 20 zones since they were implemented in January. That is a huge, huge figure, considering we've got a lockdown in the middle of that. And of course, many of those will have been handed a £100 fine. Others will have had to have paid for speed awareness courses. So the argument is that that's a significant income for the local councils in London. Records from Somerset and Avon suggest that some 25,000 notices were handed out for breaching 20 limits in 2018. The previous year, the police issued precisely 0 penalties to drivers in 20 limits. So again, that's a big, big jump in the number of drivers being prosecuted. However, what's the other side of the coin? Well, figures collected from 20 local authorities in England show that last year they spent a combined 11 million on implementing 20 mile per hour speed limits over a 5-year period. That includes obviously putting signs up, having to build road humps and traffic management schemes to try to enforce the 20s. But it seems that the effects aren't being seen. The rate of actual road casualties, including deaths and serious injuries in many of these areas, which have been 20ised, the rate's actually rising rather than falling. And So many people are asking why, and one of the fingers that's being pointed is that because of this obsession with imposing low speed limits, other vital traffic improvement schemes are being ignored. Um, Dangerous junctions aren't being re-engineered to improve them, and road maintenance, of course, has gone by the board. It doesn't really matter whether you hit a pothole on a motorcycle at 20 miles an hour or 30 miles an hour. If it's 3 foot across and a foot deep, it's going to have a bad impact on motorcyclists. And I suspect a lot of the increase in motorcycle casualties over the last few years, in urban areas at least, is down to road maintenance problems. All right, okay, still to come in the show, we'll be talking about BMW and whether or not they really have created the maintenance-free chain. And I'm just going to be talking very quickly about whether or not technological improvements such as traction control are really what they're cracked up to be. But before I do that, I just want to tell you very briefly about my on-road and off-road training. Obviously, I'm still offering on-road training, and if you're looking at the weather forecast and wondering whether you can fit the session in next week, I do have plenty of availability, but I also have recently added inexpensive 1-hour online coaching sessions to my range of courses. The idea of these is to talk through with whoever wants to book one a particular issue. For example, yesterday's rider had several different problems. There was a confidence trickling away post a crash which wrote his bike off. He bought a replacement machine. He'd gone from an upright adventure bike riding position to a sports bike forward lean position. He was finding problems with that. And it probably, the combination of these two was accounting for one of his problems, which was turning at slow speed and particularly turning right on right-handers. So the idea of these sessions is to, first of all, allow the issues to be talked through. And that's very often a first step towards actually coming to terms with what the issue really is. You have to actually try to think it through for yourself before you can make any sense of it. And the ability to talk to somebody else who can ask you leading questions and draw information out, tell you, find out what you know about the problem, will help enormously. And then basically what I try to do is come up with some practical exercises that somebody can take away onto the road and perform for themselves. Now, in essence, there's nothing very new about this. Anybody running an agony column, anybody who's written to an agony column, will have known how this works. Those have been going on for decades. And personally, I've been helping riders with problems via email and via bike forum discussions for 20 plus years already. So really, this is just a slightly higher tech version of the same thing. The big difference really is the interactive give and take nature of a video call. I can pose questions and draw answers out in one go rather than having to wait for a sort of reply to come back. So that's the big plus of an interactive online coaching session. At the end of the day, if you do book one, the onus is still on you as the trainee to go out and try out the exercises which I will offer you. But based on my time as a sort of rider coach, I've got a large range of very simple, straightforward, practical approaches to improving problems in all sorts of different riding areas. So if you're too far away from an online course, why not think about an online coaching session? £20 won't break the bank. It's barely more than the average tank cost to fill up, and it will certainly do more to improve your riding than just going out and burning that fuel for no purpose. All right, okay. BMW, have they created the maintenance-free chain? Well, that's what they're claiming. This new chain, the M Endurance chain, is due to be fitted to the S1000RR and the S1000XR models as a factory option for an additional £100, or it will be purchased as an accessory for existing owners, and more models will be following with that fitted. So what's so different about the chain? Well, basically it uses what's known as tetrahedrally amorphous carbon. Otherwise sort of a kind of industrial diamond, in other words. And what it does is it fits onto the internals of the chain. And the idea is that it reduces wear because it has very low friction and it's very hard. The chain wears, and the argument is that it never wears off. Never is a very strong word. The rest of the chain is fairly standard. It uses an X-ring to hold the lubricant inside the chain. Now, have a think about that. If the internal chain doesn't need lubricating because of its dry lubrication properties and the elimination of wear, why does it need X-rings in the first place? Why does it need that lubricant actually trapped inside the internals of the chain? My immediate thought is, until I see the results of one of these, I'll hold my opinions on this. X-ring chains themselves aren't new. We've had them since the 1980s. And this isn't the first time we've had a chain which is maintenance free. I first remember that claim being made about sintered chains, which you may remember if you've got a very long memory. It didn't last very long because they were very quickly replaced by O-rings and then X-ring chains. I had an X-ring chain on a 1990 GS500 as a standard fitment. So, rather than claiming that this technology is, pretty new, it's not. Most of the friction on chains actually comes from the X-rings themselves, which is why racers actually use plain chains. A claim that was made on one sort of response to this was, well, what about the rollers? Perhaps the chain will just wear the rollers out. Well, actually, the rollers don't wear out. The only chain I've ever had where the rollers failed was on a Yarwell with an enclosed chain case. That did actually wear out the rollers, but by that time I don't know how many miles the bike had on it, probably about 60,000 miles. The speedo had stopped working at 27,000, and I had the bicycle speedo on it for God knows how many years. The sprockets. Do sprockets wear? Well, they wear mostly because the chain wears, because the sprocket, the teeth have to fit into the hollow of the sprocket itself. Each of the little waves, the chain has to sit into the dip in the waves. As soon as the chain starts to stretch, then the rollers no longer fit these sprockets properly. They start to ride up the face of each tooth, and that's what wears them out. So, basically, if you keep the chain in good nick and you replace it before it starts to stretch dramatically, generally you actually minimize sprocket wear. I know that the advice is always to chain and sprocket, swap them at the same time, but I never bother. I usually get at least two chains to each set of sprockets. It's simply not necessary to do it every chain if you don't completely knacker the chain. It's the internal surfaces which are the problem. With standard X-ring chain, once the X-rings fail, the lubricant leaks out, and then the internals wear. What normally causes the X-rings to fail is rust or a grinding paste dust. If you don't lubricate the chain and you let it get wet and particularly salty in the winter, with sort of roads that we'll be coming up for in the next few months, the rust on the inside surfaces of the side plates, that'll wreck your X-rings and that'll finish your chain off in double quick time. But the other thing that does for chains is the grinding paste that most people lubricate their chains with. Technically what you're supposed to do is actually clean the chain first and then apply fresh lube to the chain. What a lot of people do to save time is simply spray chain lube over the chain after they finish their ride. The trouble is that chain lube has already picked up dust and it's stuck to it, and what you end up doing is you actually create a grinding paste which gets rid of your X-rings in double quick time. I rarely use a sticky chain lube for that reason. The only time I do use it is on occasions when I know the bike is going to be parked up for a few weeks, and then what I do before I actually ride the bike is I actually wash that chain lube off again, and then I re-lube the chain with Hypoid, engine Hypoid. Because if you go and look through the manual that comes with your chain, That's what most of the manufacturers actually recommend for lubricating chains. It's a bit messy, but you don't need to put a lot of it on. You can wipe it on with a cloth. Obviously not with the engine running, and it just needs a fine film on the surface, and for those X-rings to be kept moist with oil. So it's once they dry out that they start to wear. So how many miles do I get out of a chain? Well, typically I had a homemade chain oiler on my GS 500, which was used through all weathers as a dispatcher and an instructor bike. And typically I got 40 to 50,000 miles out of a chain on that. I had an electric chain oil on the Hornet, fitted that when it was brand new, but it packed up after about 4 years, and I never have got around to replacing it, as I'm not doing quite the crappy weather riding that I used to do as a courier or a full-time basic trainer. So normally I get about 25,000 out of a chain on those bikes. I think I've just put the 4th chain on that bike, and the mileage is at something around about 85,000 on the Hornet. The XJ is up around 50,000, and it is on its 3rd chain. The 2nd chain, for some reason, didn't last as long as normal, probably because it got a bit rusty while I was in New Zealand one year. We had a lot of rain here, and it washed the lube off the chain, and unfortunately the bike's not garaged. Okay, any time I've wrecked a chain, yep, was as I say, when the chain went orange, and even though I cleaned it all up and lubricated it before riding it, it done the damage. So what chains do I use? Well, DID. I'm quite happy to give a shout out for those, and they are better than any of the equivalents or claimed equivalents that I have found. You'll often find lesser brands being sold as equivalent to DID. Well, in my experience of using a lot of chains over the years, they are not. I would go for DID. I don't go for the absolute top of the range chain. There's a series of various models. I usually go for the one down from the very top of the range, and it's fine. As I say, 25,000 miles. How often do I adjust the chain? Well, normally I adjust it when I change the rear tire, so that's about every 8,000 miles. Probably do it once or twice after it's fitted when it's brand new, because it will just bed in a little, and then after that it usually lasts about 8,000 miles before I need to adjust it, right up until the point where it's starting to wear out, when all of a sudden it starts to need adjustment on a slightly more regular basis, and at that point I throw it away and I fit a new one. Right, okay, I was going to talk about bike technology, but I'll hold that over for next week, because we also already seem to be at 11:23. I've taken a little bit longer to get through what I was going to talk about than I expected. So yeah, okay, last day of summer today. Obviously there's a seriously chilly nip in the air this morning, but the forecast for the weekend is a bit warmer next weekend. But it is time to start thinking about getting winter gear out. So next week I'll talk to you about heated clothing, and I'll tell you why it's the best way to stay warm on a bike, bar none. And Nick has just asked if the BMW Wonder chain will stretch, and I suspect it probably will. So anyway, we'll see at some point in the future whether or not they really have cracked it. Okay, so from Kevin Williams here with Elevenses, thank you very much again for tuning in, and hopefully I'll see you on Wednesday at the same time. But for the moment, bye for now.